Mike, check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and it seems that all this retro talk has suddenly inspired Microsoft to start adding more retro games to their Game Pass online service. And you'd have to think that some of this might have been inspired by what we saw Nintendo do when they announced them bringing the GameCube library to the Nintendo Switch Online service. And the reaction from a lot of the long time Nintendo fans out there. And I read an article, I was reading this article from MSN, which I thought was pretty interesting, where it says that Xbox and Stream Arcade, they've joined forces to launch Retro Classics, which gives all Game Pass members access to a 50 plus collection of Activision titles like Commando, Grand Prix, Kaboom, MechWarrior 2, Combat, and so on and so forth. Now, they're saying that this initiative is described as a commitment to game preservation and backwards compatibility, which I think is very interesting. They're saying, as such, these titles will be available to play across console, PC, and on supported devices with cloud gaming. That means Xbox consoles, the Xbox app on PC, supported LG and Samsung smart TVs, Amazon Fire TV devices, and MetaQuest headsets. To access Retro Classics, users must download it via Game Pass membership. So this is very interesting how Microsoft is trying to market this, right? Because it is a marketing strategy here. They're trying to market this as game preservation, which I mean, if you start to have this conversation with those who are dedicated to physical games, they're going to highly disagree that giving, consumers access to these games via a cloud service, they're hardly going to recognize that as game preservation. But this is the way that Microsoft is spinning it. And I think that it's very interesting that they're doing this in light of the fact that Nintendo is continuing to grow their online library for everyone that has bought into and subscribed to the overall Nintendo online ecosystem, right? Nintendo is continuing to build that basically that library of games across a number of consoles and systems. And honestly, I think there are a good amount of people who are finding some enjoyment from being able to access these games. Now, I do think that Microsoft is at a bit of a disadvantage in that they don't have the same cachet. They don't have the same history. Their bag is not as deep when it comes to retro games as a company like Nintendo, right? They can only go so far back, whereas Nintendo can go all the way back to the original Nintendo, right? They've got years, they've got decades of catalog that they can just, if they wanted to crank out game after game after game and just slap more games onto their platform, they can do that. And it becomes more of an enticing proposition for someone who's interested in that cloud-based or online gaming type of gameplay. I think Nintendo has done a much better job of establishing their online ecosystem when it comes to retro, right? Just when it comes to retro. I'm not saying that it competes with Game Pass. I know we got a lot of fans of Game Pass, and I'm not even familiar with Game Pass because I've never downloaded and utilized Game Pass myself. I'm not an Xbox fanatic like that. My Xbox, knowledge and history really started with the 360. I had a 360 back when it was out. I played a lot of NBA 2K on the 360 along with, like Dynasty Wars. I played a lot of Dynasty Wars on the 360. So I'm very familiar with the 360. And it wasn't until the end of last year that I got into original Xbox. And I'm slowly building my original Xbox library, really just trying to focus on the games that were exclusive to the original Xbox, like Phantom Dust and, Spike Out Battle Street, the Otogi games, Ninja Gaiden Black, which, some of these games have obviously been re-released on modern consoles, but I do think that there's something to be said for the Xbox exclusive library of games that have not seen a re-release. So I think that's interesting. And if Microsoft can capitalize on that segment of their catalog and give fans who've never had a chance to really dive deep into the original Xbox library, that I could see being a very enticing proposition. But as I said, the the retro bag for Microsoft just isn't nearly as deep as it is for a company like Nintendo. Honestly, I don't really know many companies that can really compete with Nintendo when it comes to their retro backlog that they can kind of put on an online service outside of companies like Sega and Neo Geo and but those companies have kind of been absorbed into the Nintendo ecosystem because, even the Sega Genesis games, that's part of Nintendo's online service. And I tend to see a lot of, you know, some of my favorite Neo Geo games are available for purchase on the Switch Online store. So Nintendo has really done a really good job of capitalizing on on the retro market from an online streaming slash cloud based perspective. And I really do think Microsoft is a little bit late here. I personally think that they could have and probably should have done a better job of kind of maximizing this segment of their catalog, but now they're deciding to do this. And I think it's just going to be interesting to see the crowd response to this. And, is it going to have any kind of impact on their physical catalog? Will this endeavor that Microsoft is, aiming to do, is it going to impact their physical games? And I want to say no, because when you look at Nintendo, which at this point is the benchmark for all this stuff, when you look at what the games that they've added to their online service, I don't think games that are added to the Switch online service have as much of an impact as when they just all out re-release the games physically. Like Paper Mario Thousand Year Door, for example, I don't think it has the same impact adding it to their online service as it did when they re-released it physically. I think the physical release of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door on the Switch had a much bigger impact on the GameCube version than any kind of online service would have, because most retro gamers don't trust the online environment when it comes to retro, because they understand that at any point when it's no longer profitable for companies to keep these games in a cloud-based format or online, they can just flip the switch at any time and it's over for you. You lost it all. Now, granted, if you have some of these games downloaded to your console, then maybe you can preserve it, quote unquote, that way. But what happens if that console breaks? What happens if you want to sell that console? You really have no more access to that. So I think this could go a number of ways when it comes to the impact that it will have on physical. But I do think it's interesting that here now, Microsoft is deciding to focus their Game Pass attention on retro. But let me know what you think about this. What kind of impact do you think it will have on Microsoft's ecosystem when it comes to their physical games? Do you think this will be a very interesting proposition for folks who do care about retro? Do you think they'll want to dive into this catalog that Microsoft is going to be, adding to the Game Pass? Let me know what you think about this, and I'll catch you in the next one. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.